Hi, welcome to this Lumus360 webinar that will focus on how to get 360-degree feedback right. We've developed the content specifically for those who have responsibility for implementing a 360-degree feedback process within their business or organisation, and you'll walk away with an implementation plan that really does work. Before we get into things, let me just introduce myself. My name is David and I'll be your host for the next 20 minutes or so. I was thinking the other day about what is it that gives me the authority, the credibility to talk about 360-degree feedback implementation at a strategic level. And then I started to run the numbers. So I've been in the business now for 16 years, and a key part of my role has been working with customers to get 360 right within their context and against their needs. And on average, we develop one 360-degree feedback survey tool every week. And therefore, I've had the privilege of supporting in excess of 700 organisations within the public, private, third sectors, and of course our multinational companies to put 360-degree feedback in place. Okay, let's chat through the agenda then. So we'll be looking at three things. The first being, how do you make sure that you've got the right foundation, the solid base from which to build your survey tool and process from? Then let's take a look at the things that organisations typically get wrong. The interesting point for me with these are that the things that actually can be put right with relative ease. And then lastly, let's pull it all together into a process, a framework, a plan if you like, for how to get it right within your business, within your context. Let's start by looking at what absolutely underpins success. Now for me, that's about exploring two key areas. The first one is being clear about your motive and your reason for implementing 360 feedback. So 360 can be used as a performance measurement tool where the context is based on assessment, scoring, appraising, reviewing, benchmarking and all that kind of stuff. Or it can be used as a personal development tool where the only motive is about supporting people to continuously grow, i.e. providing them with feedback that enables them to identify their strengths and their development opportunities and then use that information to work out how they can be even better in their current role. The second thing that we have to do is to recognise the organisation's level of feedback maturity in order that we can make sure that we shape the process and the journey appropriately. Doing a deeper dive into clarity of purpose. Whilst all 360 feedback systems use very similar technical processes, how they're implemented is totally different. i.e. performance versus development is a little bit like black versus white, hot versus cold, apples versus pears, etc. Okay, they're just fundamentally different and therefore require different approaches. So let's just chat through some of those differences. Firstly, within the performance management world, the output has a clear link or line of sight to some form of benchmarking or grading activity. Whereas within the personal development arena, the output is typically an individual report that is used for personal development only. With regards to rating scales, within the performance management world, we'll typically use some form of judgmental scale, i.e. people will be asked to grade or to score each other. So things like, does this person meet or exceed your expectations? Are they above average, below average? Are they competent, etc.? Within the personal development space, we'll use a developmental scale, i.e. is this an area where this person is underdeveloped, developed, or is it a strength? Or more typically, we use a frequency scale. So feedback providers are asked to state how often or how frequently they see this person carrying out the behaviour described. Now the interesting thing around the rating scales is that they are totally different, both in relation to how people provide that feedback and of course more importantly how it's received at the far end. This next point is about outputs. Performance measurement tools will typically deliver some form of score, grade or mark, whereas those 360 systems used for personal development will only deliver insightful feedback that will be used for development purposes only. This last point refers to ownership. On the one side, HR will typically own all of the data and the reports. On the other side, there will be one report produced, and that's owned by the individual. If you'd have asked me a couple of years ago about whether these approaches could be merged, I'd have definitely said no. However, in the last 12 months, I've supported 6 different organisations to develop survey tools that have been predominantly based on personal development, but where the output of those feedback systems have been used to enhance performance appraisal conversations. So if you're sat there thinking that actually within your world you'd like to occupy the space between both of these, then please give me a shout and I'll be more than happy to share the experience that we've gained over the last 18 months or so. In summary then, point number 1 for me is about being clear about why you're doing 360 feedback and then making sure that you build everything else from that point. The next key consideration is the level of feedback maturity within the organisation. So let me just chat you through this model. So across the bottom we've got time, and then up the side we've got the level of feedback maturity. In an organisational culture that has a low level of maturity, what typically happens is that people don't know how to give sound, constructive, developmental feedback to each other. And particularly when it comes to giving feedback to colleagues or to their line manager. And likewise, people aren't skilled in receiving feedback. They don't really know how to listen, interpret, conclude, and then use that feedback effectively to enhance their ongoing development. Therefore, consequently, what happens in an organisational culture with low feedback maturity, people just avoid it. At the other end of the scale, i.e. the space we aspire to be, the majority of people within the organisation would be feedback champions, i.e. they're competent at giving and receiving feedback and they just get it. So my point is that what you need to do is to pitch and to build your system, your process based on the level of feedback maturity within your organisation. And if you misjudge it, the whole thing really won't work. An example would be that in a business or organisation where feedback is not the norm, the first time 360 is used, it should be done in a way where participants feel safe and in control. An example of safe could be that there's no expectation put on people to share their reports with anybody else, and therefore that removes a lot of the apprehension generally associated with 360 feedback. An example of in control would be that individuals are allowed to pick and to choose those people who they invite feedback from. So building from a solid foundation is about having clarity of purpose, i.e. being clear about why you're using 360 and where it fits, and then building the system, the process, the journey from where the organisation is currently at. Moving on, in my experience there are 5 things that differentiate those organisations that implement 360 well and the rest. And these are: firstly, using a questionnaire that's not fit for purpose, developing technical solutions that are antiquated, poor communications, particularly with regards to how the 360 feedback will be used, not supporting participants to make the most of the opportunity, and then finally not following through, i.e. not having a framework in place that will ensure real value is added both for the participant and for the organisation. Let's look at each one of these in a little bit more detail. Just like any other survey, you only get out what you put in. If you ask rubbish questions, then you'll get rubbish outputs. To this end, questionnaires have to be fit for purpose and clearly define the organisation's expectations. Just to expand on this a little. About a year or so ago, I was developing 2 questionnaires, one for Virgin Money, the other one for Solihull Council. Now, both of those organisations are absolutely at the top of their league in relation to what they do and how they do it. However, their questionnaires were a million miles apart in relation to what the organisation needed of its managers and leaders at that point in time. Secondly, the questionnaire has to be pitched at the right level. A questionnaire designed for exec members will look totally different to one designed for middle managers, will look totally different to one designed for first-line supervisors. And finally, it has to have the right cultural fit. The right cultural fit in relation to its style, tone, and the language that's used. The two key points here for me are that firstly, generic off-the-shelf questionnaires just don't work. They're dead, okay, they just don't work. The second point is that this shouldn't be a long drawn out or costly process. Lumus, for example, offer a free questionnaire design service. So we'll take your existing competencies and develop a questionnaire around that. We'll take your values and do the same there. Or we'll give you a whole range of questionnaire development tools that you can use, and then we'll support you to take the outputs of those and develop a questionnaire. So point number one, avoid the pitfall of asking the wrong questions. Pitfall number two wouldn't have been on my list 5 years ago. But today's users have a clear expectation that their online experience will be simple, intuitive and fast. And no longer is it acceptable to put up frequently asked questions, user guides and all that kind of stuff. Okay, people just want to click and go. The other reality is that people will judge the whole of your 360 process based on their online experience. And to that end, it just has to be right. Okay, so some must-haves. Simple, intuitive. An example of this then, so a couple of years ago, the norm was we would send people an email. In that email there'd be a link. They'd click on the link, that would take them to a landing page. Once they got to the landing page, they'd then have to enter their username and a unique password. Having done that, they'd then press kind of enter, and then they would eventually end up on the page that we wanted them to end up on. Anyhow, so the feedback we got from people was that whilst they recognised we needed to make the whole thing secure, at the same time it just felt a bit kind of cumbersome, it felt a bit kind of awkward, and it took them a long time to kind of get done what they needed to get done. So we sat down and we came up with a rather unique encoded link that basically means now what happens is email arrives in somebody's box, they click on one link and they go directly into the space where we want them to. So it's that kind of stuff I'm talking about, simple, intuitive, and I suppose it's being on the kind of cutting edge of kind of where online technology is. My second point there relates to developing that online experience in order to ensure it meets the organisation's needs. So every feedback survey that we've ever built has been different in relation to its look, its feel, its online experience, the journey that people go through, etc., etc. Likewise with automated emails. Some organisations want us just to use 1 or 2 automated polite reminders. Others want 5 or 6 included in the journey. It matters not. My point is that the journey needs to be tailored so that it works for your organisation and the cultural expectations around that. With regards to brand, the user experience must have the organisation's look and feel to it. Again, 5 years ago, unless you was prepared to pay a small fortune, the best you could have hoped for was to have your logo somewhere on one of the screens. But nowadays the world has certainly moved on. Okay, and you should now have a clear expectation that your survey tool will be developed around your brand, okay, and at no extra cost. Dynamic design is also another must-have. Again, people have a clear expectation that they'll be able to complete these activities on their phone, their iPads, their tablets, etc., etc. Okay, and it's certainly not acceptable to expect people to negotiate desktop designs and desktop solutions on their mobile devices. Pitfall number 3 is one that's easy to get right, but at the same time it's also one that organisations consistently get wrong. Now this doesn't require a big massive comm strategy at all. All it needs is a consistent message to each of our 2 key stakeholder groups. The Rolls Royce for me, with participants, kind of bring them in, spend 30 minutes with them, help them understand what the 360 is, what it's not, how it's going to be used, what they can expect from the process, what they need to do, etc. Okay, and with respondents, again, they don't need a full-on briefing. Okay, there's half a dozen different ways that you can get that consistent message out to them in a simple, clear way. My big point here is that any 360 provider worth their salt will provide you with all of the templates, all of the comms material that you need to kind of communicate your project well. I believe that 360-degree feedback coaching, or facilitation as it's often referred to, is a really important part of getting the overall journey right, and particularly for those managers who are going through the process for the very first time. If you're wondering why, I'd say for two key reasons. Firstly, in my experience, most middle managers haven't necessarily got the skills, the experience, or the level of individual feedback maturity needed to be able to work through 50 to 60 pages of data, listen to it, take a balanced view, draw relevant conclusions, focusing on the really important stuff, convert that then into an action plan, and then work out how they follow through on that in a really positive way. That's the first point. The second point is, again, in my experience, most people going through it for the very first time will read the report with their heart as opposed to their head. They'll zone in on all the low stuff. They'll take something that's really small and blow it out of all proportion. They'll put a huge amount of energy into trying to work out who said what. And certainly they won't take a balanced view. They won't value the positive stuff in there, etc. For those people who aren't supported to make the most of the feedback opportunity, one of two things happen. Those who received really good feedback tend to walk away with a nice warm feeling in the belly. Those who didn't get quite so good feedback walk away with a bad taste in the mouth. But either way, within a week or so, that feedback report ends up in the bottom drawer and it's forgotten about, and certainly there's not a clear action plan at the end of the process and commitment to develop further. So, feedback facilitation is all about supporting participants to take ownership of their own 360 reports, to listen to and take on board the perception of others, to lift out any key messages both in relation to strengths and perceived development opportunities, to draw out a balanced set of conclusions, and then to drive those into a really good action plan. Now, there's a variety of ways of achieving this. One-on-one coaching works exceptionally well, whether that's using an internal coach, an external coach, or line manager, whether it's split over one session or over two sessions. Feedback days work well as well for up to about 12 people, or a mixed approach where individuals get a one-on-one coaching session looking at their own report, and then they come together and do a group session around action planning. That works really well as well. From our part, we'll support you in any way we can. We can provide skilled coaches, and we've also run many training sessions, train the feedback coach, train the line manager as coach, and all that kind of stuff. So for me, the big question here and the thing to explore is how will you support your participants to make the most of their 360 feedback opportunity? The last one then. So this really is where the rubber hits the road. Now, I'm sure you're all familiar with this development ladder. And 360 is very good at awareness raising. It's also very good at helping people identify their opportunities. Opportunities in relation to strengths that they should be better deploying or better leveraging, okay, and opportunities in relation to areas they could grow and develop further. Action planning goes without saying. The need to have a clear plan in place that says what I'm going to do, how I'll achieve that, what support I'll get, by when, how success will be measured, and all that good kind of stuff, okay, goes without saying. Now, from that point onwards, of course, what we're looking for is improved performance, and up to the point where we can measure our return on investment, both at an individual and at an organisational level. Unfortunately, without a clear strategic process plan for following through in place, all those great intentions that were put together at the action planning stage, of course, rarely get followed through on, unless there's a strategy in place and people are held accountable for following through on that. I can't emphasize this enough. It's probably the biggest criteria in relation to whether a 360-degree exercise works or doesn't. This slide then brings all of that together into an implementation framework that really does work. Step 1. You need to establish the foundations. Is the 360 process going to be used as part of a performance measurement initiative, or is it for development only? And also, what's the organisation's feedback maturity level from which the whole process needs to be built from? Having got the foundations in place, the next thing to focus on is building a questionnaire that's fit for purpose and a user journey that meets your organisation's needs. With both of these, it should take no more than 1 to 2 weeks, and certainly from our perspective, we don't charge anything for that service. Getting a clear and consistent message out to the organisation with regards to how the 360 will be used, what they're expected to do, and how they do it well is the next thing on the agenda. And again, for me, your 360 provider should give you everything you need to enable this to happen. Don't forget to put a participants launch session in place, and ideally face to face. The key purpose being alignment and engagement, and this is definitely 30 minutes well spent. Feedback collection and report production typically takes 3 to 4 weeks and should be fully automated wherever possible. Now, on saying that, inevitably there are some administrative actions that need to be done, such as dealing with bounce back emails, answering general inquiries, and chasing at the end of the process anybody who still hasn't completed their questionnaire. Most of our clients use our fully managed or end-to-end service, in which we take on all of these administrative actions, thereby ensuring it's a hassle-free journey for them. Feedback support. So how will people be supported to convert their 360-degree feedback reports into a value-adding action plan? And then last but not least, the follow-through and tracking, which is by far the most important step on the whole journey. My top tip for implementing 360 well would be to do a deep dive into each one of these in turn in order to end up with a clear plan for each aspect. I hope you found that useful, and please share the link with others if you can. If you're in the process of putting a 360 project together and you want to chat it through, then give us a shout either on 01291 637 380 or email support@lumus360.co.uk, and we'll certainly help in any way that we can.